Chapter 1. The struggle begins. David Morgan had once been a promising engineer back on Earth. Life was on a clear track, with a steady job, close friends, and a well-laid-out future. But everything changed after his company downsized, a decision that left him unemployed and adrift. Desperate for work, he took the only job he could find, working with a mining company on Omera Prime, an alien planet renowned for its rare minerals. However, even this new opportunity came with its challenges, and within a few months, he found himself stranded on the alien world, jobless and nearly penniless after the mining company shut down unexpectedly. Life on Omera Prime wasn't like Earth. The bustling metropolis of Xerion was filled with diverse alien species, each with their own customs, languages, and unique ways of life. Its towering skyscrapers, glowing in neon hues, cast reflections that bounced off the metallic streets below. The air held an electric tang from all the tech and machinery, making every day feel both exhilarating and overwhelming. Yet, David found himself a stranger here, struggling to adapt to alien customs, and his savings had dwindled to almost nothing. David's only refuge was the small apartment he had managed to rent with the last of his earnings. The building was old by Omera Prime standards, built in the traditional Omerian style with intricate patterns and crystal-infused walls that glowed softly in the dim light. But even this place came with its troubles. He was constantly behind on rent, unable to find steady work in a city where humans were a rarity and not always trusted. And so, every time he left his apartment, he would hurry past his landlady's office, hoping to avoid any confrontation about the rent he owed. But fate had other plans. One late afternoon, as David slipped into the building, he heard a voice call out, "Mr. Morgan." He froze, slowly turning to face New York Ala, his Omerian landlady. She stood tall, nearly a foot above him, with her slender figure draped in flowing robes of deep indigo. Her skin shimmered in shades of violet under the hallway's soft lighting, and her silver eyes narrowed as they focused on him. New York Ala was known to be strict but fair, a quality that had helped her maintain the building in this competitive city for years. Her tenants respected her, but they also feared disappointing her. David approached her slowly, his mind racing for excuses. "New York Ala, I was just going to dash. To pay your rent?" she interrupted, arching a brow. Her voice was melodic, but had a steely undertone that brooked no nonsense. "I have been patient, David. I understand you're in a difficult situation, but I cannot keep allowing late payments. My patience is not infinite." David took a deep breath, his gaze dropping in shame. He had been working odd jobs here and there, fixing machines or helping with minor repairs for anyone willing to pay, but it was never enough. The cost of living in Xerion was high, and every credit he earned seemed to disappear as soon as he made it. "I know, and I'm sorry. I'm trying to find more work," he began, struggling to meet her gaze. "If you could just give me another month, Dash." New York Ala's sigh was deep and echoed slightly in the empty hall. She studied him with an inscrutable expression, her silver eyes seeming to pierce right through him. "You are skilled, that much I've seen," she said after a pause. "But you're also human. That makes finding work here difficult, doesn't it?" David nodded. It was true. Although Xerion was a cosmopolitan city with various species mingling freely, humans were still a rarity and viewed with a mix of fascination and suspicion. Most employers preferred hiring Omerians or other familiar species, and David's attempts to break into the workforce had been met with polite rejections or outright refusals. "I promise, New York Ala, I'll find a way to pay you. I just need a little more time," he pleaded. New York Ala tilted her head, a thoughtful look crossing her face. Finally, she crossed her arms, her fingers tapping against her sleeves as if in silent deliberation. After a long pause, she spoke. "There may be another way," she said slowly, her gaze never leaving his face. "The building is old, and there are always repairs that need to be done. The maintenance crew is unreliable, and I've noticed you're quite resourceful when it comes to machines." David's ears perked up at this unexpected twist. "Are you saying I could work off my rent by helping with repairs?" She nodded, though there was a slight smirk on her lips, as if she found his enthusiasm both amusing and endearing. "Yes, but understand, David, this isn't charity. I will expect quality work. If you're willing, I'll defer your rent in exchange for maintenance on the building. But if you fail to deliver, we're back to square one." David grinned, the first real smile he'd felt in days. Thank you, New Yorkala. I promise, I won't let you down. As he turned to go, she called out after him, her voice softer, almost hesitant. David, don't think of this as a favor. It's simply an arrangement. He nodded, sensing the importance of her words. In her culture, favors often came with strings attached, obligations that could last a lifetime. But an arrangement was clean, defined, without personal ties. The next morning, David began his first task, fixing the faulty heating unit in one of the upper floors. The building was a curious mix of advanced Omirian technology and outdated systems, a combination that required both skill and a willingness to learn. As he worked, he became acutely aware of New Yorkala's watchful presence. She would pass by, observing his progress without a word, her expression unreadable. Hours turned into days, and with each repair he completed, David found himself gaining confidence. He fixed the plumbing, rewired lighting systems, and even managed to restore a few old hollow screens in the communal lounge. New Yorkala's tenants, a mix of Omirians and other alien species, began to recognize him, some even nodding in acknowledgement as he passed. It was a small victory, but for someone who had felt invisible for so long, it was a start. One evening, as he worked on a particularly stubborn piece of machinery in the basement, New Yorkala appeared, leaning against the doorframe with a faint smile. "You've done well," she remarked, her voice softer than usual. David wiped his hands on a cloth, glancing at her with a grin. "I'm glad to hear it. This old place is a challenge, but I like a good challenge." New Yorkala chuckled, the sound like a soft melody. "You humans are so persistent. Even in the face of difficulties, you keep going. It's admirable." David looked at her, surprised by the compliment. "Thank you, New Yorkala. That means a lot." They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of the machines filling the air between them. Then, almost on impulse, David asked, "Why do you own this building? I mean, with your skills, you could probably live anywhere in Zirion." New Yorkala's gaze grew distant, her expression contemplative. "This building belonged to my family. It was passed down to me after my husband passed away. I suppose I hold on to it because it's all I have left of him." David felt a pang of empathy, understanding the weight of loss. "I'm sorry, New Yorkala. I didn't mean to bring up painful memories." She waved a hand dismissively, though her eyes held a hint of sadness. "It's fine. The past is what it is. We Omirians don't dwell on it. We move forward, just as you humans do." Their conversation ended there, but David found himself thinking about her words long after she left. Beneath her calm, collected exterior, New Yorkala carried her own burdens, her own struggles. And somehow, knowing that brought them a little closer, bridging the gap between human and Omirian. Over the following days, their interactions grew more frequent, each encounter marked by a growing sense of camaraderie. David began to notice small details about her. The way her eyes softened when she spoke about her family, the rare smiles she gave when she thought no one was looking, and the quiet strength that kept her going despite everything. For David, New Yorkala was no longer just his landlady. She was a friend, an ally in this strange new world. And as he continued his work, he found himself looking forward to each conversation, each shared moment. But little did he know that their unlikely friendship was about to deepen into something far more profound, something that neither of them could have anticipated. Chapter 2: Repairs and Revelations. The next few weeks slipped by in a haze of late nights and early mornings as David dedicated himself to keeping New Yorkala's building running. Each repair felt like a small victory, a reminder that he could still make a difference, even in this alien city. And each day, he grew closer to New Yorkala, his mysterious and graceful landlady who never ceased to surprise him. David found himself spending more time with New Yorkala outside the boundaries of their landlord-tenant relationship. She had a calm, grounding presence, and her company filled the emptiness he'd felt since arriving on Omera Prime. She taught him about Omirian culture, their philosophies, their history, and even the subtle meanings behind their gestures and expressions. In return, he shared stories of Earth, tales of long-lost civilizations, and simple, everyday moments that felt like an eternity away. One evening, as the two sat together on the rooftop after a long day of repairs, New Yorkala turned to him with a look of curiosity. "Tell me, David," she began, her voice gentle yet probing. What do humans find most difficult about leaving Earth? David took a moment to consider her question, watching the alien skyline glow with neon lights and distant stars. I think it's the feeling of leaving behind everything familiar. On Earth, there's a rhythm to life, a sense of belonging, even in the smallest things. Out here, everything feels so different. And for some, that difference is exciting. But for others, it's lonely. New York Allah nodded slowly, as if she understood. Our people have a saying, to find one's place in the universe, one must first feel lost within it. He smiled at her words. That's beautiful. And I guess in a way, it's true. Sometimes, being lost helps us see things we wouldn't notice otherwise. New York Allah gazed at him thoughtfully, her silver eyes reflecting the distant lights. You're a resilient one, David. Most humans I've met couldn't handle the challenges of living on Omera Prime. But you adapt. You find a way. David shrugged modestly. I'm just doing what I can to get by. No, New York Allah said firmly, her voice almost a whisper. It's more than that. You have a strength, a determination that I rarely see. It's refreshing. A comfortable silence settled between them, the kind that only happens between those who've come to understand each other. And in that silence, David realized just how much New York Allah had come to mean to him. She was more than his landlady, more than just another alien in a strange city. She was a friend, a companion in his journey of rediscovery. The following week, New York Allah requested David's help with an extensive renovation project, restoring the ancient murals in the building's lobby. The murals, faded by time, depicted Omerian mythology, a colorful tapestry of gods, goddesses, and legendary beasts. New York Allah explained that these murals had been painted by her ancestors and were considered sacred in her family. Is it okay for me to help with something so personal? David asked, feeling a sense of reverence as he observed the intricate designs. New York Allah smiled, her expression softening. It's rare for us to share our history with outsiders. But you're not just an outsider anymore, David. You're part of this building, part of our little community. Her words touched him deeply, and he felt a surge of pride and responsibility. With her guidance, he spent hours carefully cleaning and restoring each section of the mural, preserving its colors and textures. It was painstaking work, but David relished every moment of it. And with each brushstroke, he felt more connected to New York Allah and her culture. One day, as they worked side by side, David asked a question that had been on his mind for some time. New York Allah, do you ever think about leaving this place? Starting somewhere new? She looked at him, surprised by his question. I have in the past. But the idea of leaving everything I know, it feels impossible. This building is more than just a home to me. It's a part of my family's legacy. David nodded, understanding the weight of her words. It must be hard, carrying that legacy alone. New York Allah's gaze dropped to the mural, her fingers tracing one of the painted figures. It is. When my husband was alive, we shared this responsibility together. But since his passing, it's been a heavy burden. Her vulnerability caught David off guard, and he felt an urge to comfort her. Tentatively, he placed a hand on her shoulder, feeling the warmth of her skin beneath his fingers. I'm here, New York Allah, he said softly. You don't have to carry this alone anymore. She looked up at him, her expression filled with gratitude and something else he couldn't quite identify. For a moment, they held each other's gaze, an unspoken understanding passing between them. But before the moment could deepen, New York Allah pulled away, her expression returning to its usual calm composure. Thank you, David, she said, her voice steady. Your support means more to me than you realize. The days passed in a comfortable rhythm, and David found himself looking forward to each shared project, each quiet conversation. He marveled at the way New York Allah could go from being a stern, no-nonsense landlady to a warm, insightful friend in the span of a heartbeat. She had an elegance and grace that he admired, and he found himself growing more captivated by her with each passing day. One evening, as they were wrapping up their work in the lobby, New York Allah surprised him with an invitation. There's a festival tomorrow evening, she said, a hint of excitement in her voice. It's a celebration of the harvest season, and the entire city will be filled with lights and music. Would you like to join me? David's eyes lit up. I'd love to. The next evening, They set off together, weaving through the crowded streets as Omirians danced, sang, and celebrated. The festival was a dazzling spectacle, with vibrant colors and music that resonated through every corner of the city. Vendors lined the streets, selling exotic foods and handmade crafts, and David felt a thrill of excitement as he took it all in. New York Ala seemed to come alive amidst the festivities, her usual reserved demeanor giving way to a playful energy. She laughed freely, her eyes shining with joy, and David found himself captivated by her radiance. He couldn't help but smile, feeling a warmth in his chest that he hadn't felt in a long time. As they wandered through the festival, New York Ala led him to a small booth where an elderly Omirian woman was selling traditional jewelry. New York Ala picked up a bracelet adorned with delicate crystals, each one reflecting the light in a beautiful array of colors. "It's beautiful," David remarked, admiring the craftsmanship. New York Ala smiled, slipping the bracelet onto his wrist. "It's a token of friendship," she explained. "In our culture, giving a piece of jewelry is a way of showing appreciation for someone special." David looked down at the bracelet, touched by the gesture. "Thank you, New York Ala. I don't know what to say." She met his gaze, her expression soft. "Just promise me that you'll continue to bring your light to this place, David. You've become a part of my life here, and I don't want that to change." For a moment, David felt the urge to tell her how much she meant to him, to confess the growing feelings he had been keeping hidden. But he held back, unsure of whether she felt the same way. Instead, he simply nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. "I promise." That night, as they walked back to the building, a comfortable silence settled between them. David felt a newfound sense of belonging, a feeling he hadn't experienced since leaving Earth. And as they reached the entrance, New York Ala turned to him with a small smile. "Good night, David." "Good night, New York Ala," he replied, watching as she disappeared into her apartment. As he lay in bed that night, David couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them. Their friendship had deepened into something more, a connection that went beyond words. And for the first time since arriving on Omera Prime, he felt truly at home. But even as he drifted off to sleep, he couldn't shake the feeling that this newfound happiness was fragile, like a delicate crystal that could shatter at any moment. And in his heart, he wondered if New York Ala felt the same way. Chapter 3. Unspoken Bonds. The next morning, David woke with a sense of anticipation. He could still feel the warmth of New York Ala's presence from the night before, her laughter echoing in his mind like a melody he couldn't shake. He replayed their shared moments at the festival over and over in his head, the way her eyes sparkled under the city lights, the gentle touch of her hand as she slipped the bracelet onto his wrist. The memory was vivid, and it left him feeling both hopeful and uncertain. As he worked on the building's various repairs that day, he found himself distracted, his thoughts drifting back to New York Ala. They had grown close, and he cherished the bond they shared, but he couldn't deny that his feelings for her were evolving into something deeper. Yet, he hesitated to express his emotions, unsure of how she might react. The last thing he wanted was to ruin the friendship they had worked so hard to build. Around midday, New York Ala appeared, her usual graceful presence tempered by a hint of weariness. She watched as he adjusted a broken valve on the building's main water system, her eyes observing his every movement. "You look lost in thought," she remarked, leaning against the wall. "Is something troubling you?" David paused, glancing at her with a wry smile. "Just thinking about last night. The festival was incredible. I can't remember the last time I had that much fun." New York Ala's expression softened, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "It was a wonderful evening. I'm glad you came with me, David. I don't often get the chance to share such moments with someone." He could hear the vulnerability in her voice, and it tugged at his heart. She was opening up to him, sharing a part of herself that she usually kept guarded. In that moment, he felt a surge of courage. "New York Ala," he began, his voice hesitant. "I wanted to thank you for everything. You didn't have to give me a chance when I couldn't pay my rent, but you did. And because of that, I found a home here, thanks to you." New York Ala looked down, a faint blush coloring her cheeks, which was unusual for an Omirian. She seemed flustered, but her gaze remained warm. "You're welcome, David," she replied softly. "You've brought something special to this place. It feels Different with you here. Less lonely. David's heart pounded at her words, but before he could respond, a loud knock echoed through the corridor. They turned to see an Omirian man standing at the entrance, his posture stiff and formal. His clothing was ornate, decorated with intricate symbols of wealth and status. New York Allah, the man greeted her with a bow, his tone laced with a forced politeness. It's been a long time. New York Allah's expression hardened, the warmth in her eyes replaced by a guarded look. Varek, I wasn't expecting you. David watched as the man approached them, his gaze shifting from New York Allah to him with a look of disdain. It didn't take long for David to piece together the situation. This man, Varek, was clearly someone from New York Allah's past, someone who seemed to hold a certain power over her. Who is this? Human? Varek asked, his voice dripping with disdain. This is David, a tenant of mine. New York Allah replied coolly, maintaining her composure. He's been helping me with repairs around the building. Varek's gaze swept over David, his expression filled with scorn. A tenant? New York Allah, it's unseemly for a widow of your stature to be associating so closely with a laborer. David clenched his fists, feeling the weight of Varek's words like a punch to the gut. He was used to being underestimated on Omera Prime, but this man's arrogance was something else entirely. New York Allah took a step forward, her voice calm but firm. Varek, I appreciate your concern, but my affairs are my own. I don't need you to dictate who I spend time with. Varek's eyes narrowed, a hint of anger flashing across his face. You're making a mockery of your family's legacy, New York Allah. This building, this charity work, it's beneath you. You should be moving on, finding a proper match, not lingering in the past. David felt a surge of protectiveness toward New York Allah, anger bubbling within him. But he held his tongue, not wanting to overstep. This was New York Allah's fight, and he respected her enough to let her handle it. New York Allah's gaze was steely as she faced Varek. My choices are my own, and I have no intention of allowing anyone to decide my path for me. If you came here to lecture me, you can save your breath. Varek sneered, his eyes glinting with malice. Very well. But don't be surprised when you find yourself alone, New York Allah. It's what happens to those who cling to foolish dreams. With that, he turned on his heel and strode away, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. The tension in the air lingered long after he was gone, and David found himself at a loss for words. New York Allah remained silent, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry you had to witness that. David shook his head, reaching out to place a comforting hand on her shoulder. You don't have to apologize, New York Allah. I'm here for you, whatever you need. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. Thank you, David. You've been more than just a tenant. You're a friend, and that means more to me than I can say. David's heart swelled at her words, and he felt a surge of courage. He took a step closer, his hand still resting on her shoulder, and met her gaze. New York Allah, I know this might be forward, but I care about you. More than just a friend. She looked at him, her eyes widening in surprise, and for a moment, he feared he had overstepped. But then, a soft smile spread across her lips, and she reached up to touch his hand. I care about you too, David, but there are so many complications. My family, my people, they wouldn't understand. David felt a pang of frustration, but he understood. Their worlds were different, and a relationship between them would be met with disapproval from both sides. Yet, standing there with her, he couldn't shake the feeling that what they shared was worth fighting for. I don't care what others think, New York Allah, he said softly. All I know is that being with you feels right. She held his gaze, her eyes shining with emotion. Then let's not worry about the future for now. Let's just enjoy this moment. And in that quiet, unspoken agreement, they found solace in each other's presence, standing together in the hallway, their worlds colliding in a beautiful, fragile connection. Chapter 4. The Pretend That Became Real. David's feelings for New York Allah grew stronger with each passing day, and despite the uncertainty surrounding their relationship, they found comfort in the moments they shared. The silent glances, the lingering touches, the unspoken words, all spoke volumes, creating a language of their own that only they could understand. Their world, however, was soon disrupted by unexpected news. New York Kala's family was planning a visit. The news came in a simple message, but its implications weighed heavily on both of them. In Omirian culture, family visits carried an air of formality, especially when a widow like New York Kala was involved. Her family would be expecting to see her settled, or at least on the path to a new union. "They'll judge me, David," New York Kala confided one evening as they sat in the dimly lit courtyard of the building. The stars above cast a faint glow, and the silence between them was thick with tension. "They'll think I've failed for not finding a suitable match." David reached for her hand, holding it gently. "You haven't failed, New York Kala. You're one of the strongest people I know. Your family has no right to make you feel this way." She sighed, her gaze dropping to their entwined fingers. "Perhaps, but it doesn't change their expectations. They'll insist that I marry again, to uphold the family's legacy, and they would never approve of this." David understood the depth of her words. In Omirian society, interspecies relationships were often frowned upon, especially those involving humans who were seen as outsiders. Their bond, though precious to them, would be viewed as an affront to tradition. "Then let me help," David offered, his voice steady. "I'll pretend to be your partner, just for the visit. They'll see you're not alone, and maybe it'll keep them from pushing you into something you don't want." New York Kala looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to understand the depth of his offer. "You would do that for me?" David smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'd do anything for you, New York Kala." And so, they began to prepare for the visit, each detail meticulously planned to present the illusion of a committed partnership. New York Kala coached David on Omirian customs, teaching him the formal gestures and phrases he would need to navigate her family's scrutiny. They practiced their roles, laughing at the awkwardness, yet finding a strange comfort in the familiarity that grew between them. The day of the visit arrived, and New York Kala's family gathered in the building's main hall. Her parents, stoic and regal in their traditional robes, eyed David with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Her younger brother, Saren, seemed more openly critical, his gaze flicking over David with barely concealed disdain. "So, you're the human my sister has chosen?" Saren sneered, his tone dripping with skepticism. "How unconventional." David stood tall, meeting Saren's gaze with quiet confidence. "New York Kala is a remarkable woman, and I'm honored to be by her side," he replied, his tone respectful yet firm. New York Kala's father cleared his throat, his gaze shifting to his daughter. "New York Kala, we only wish for your happiness, but we cannot ignore the implications of this relationship. The family's legacy is at stake." New York Kala's expression softened, though her resolve remained strong. "Father, I understand the importance of our legacy, but my happiness is not negotiable. I've chosen to be with David because he values me for who I am, not for what I represent." Her mother's gaze softened, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "We only want the best for you, New York Kala, but this path, it will not be easy." David reached for New York Kala's hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "We understand that, but we're prepared to face whatever challenges come our way." For a moment, there was silence, the weight of their words hanging heavy in the air. Then, New York Kala's father sighed, a hint of resignation in his gaze. "If this is truly your choice, New York Kala, then we will respect it. But know that the path you've chosen is one of hardship. You must be prepared for the consequences." New York Kala nodded, her gaze unwavering. "I am." As her family departed, the tension in the room dissipated, leaving David and New York Kala alone in the quiet. They stood in silence, the weight of the encounter settling over them. Then, New York Kala turned to David, a soft smile breaking through her composed facade. "You were incredible," she murmured, her voice filled with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you." David smiled, pulling her into a gentle embrace. "There's no need to thank me, New York Kala. I meant every word I said." They stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, letting the silence speak for them. In that moment, the lines between pretense and reality blurred, and they realized that their connection was deeper than either of them had anticipated. The following days brought a new sense of freedom. Without the shadow of her family's expectations looming over them, David and New York Kala allowed themselves to explore their relationship openly. They spent their evenings sharing quiet dinners, laughing over shared stories, and finding comfort in each other's presence. Their bond grew stronger, built on trust, understanding, and a love that transcended the boundaries of their respective worlds. One evening, as they sat together on the rooftop, David took Nuyurkala's hand, his gaze filled with sincerity. Nuyurkala, I know this wasn't part of the plan, but I want to be with you. Truly. No more pretending. Nuyurkala looked at him, her eyes shining with emotion. I feel the same, David. You've brought so much light into my life, and I can't imagine my world without you. They shared a tender kiss, sealing their unspoken promise to face whatever challenges lay ahead. In that moment, they were no longer a human and an Omirian, but two souls who had found solace in each other's arms. In the months that followed, David and Nuyurkala faced their share of challenges. Their relationship was met with skepticism, even hostility, from those who clung to tradition. But together, they stood strong, their love a beacon of hope in a world that often felt cold and unforgiving. David found steady work in Zirion, using his engineering skills to build a new life for himself and Nuyurkala. They renovated the building together, transforming it into a haven for others who sought a sense of belonging. Their home became a sanctuary, a place where all were welcome, regardless of species or background. And through it all, David and Nuyurkala found joy in the simple moments, the shared laughter, the quiet conversations, the knowledge that they had found a home in each other. Epilogue. A beautiful ending. Years passed, and David and Nuyurkala's love grew stronger, weathering the storms that life threw their way. They built a life together, one filled with laughter, resilience, and a love that defied the odds. Their story became a legend in Zirion, a tale of two souls who had found each other in the vastness of the universe. On a quiet evening, as they sat together on their rooftop, watching the stars, David took Nuyurkala's hand and whispered, "Thank you for giving me a home." Nuyurkala smiled, her eyes filled with love. "You are my home, David, and you always will be." They sat together, hand in hand, as the stars shone above them, a silent witness to their journey, their love, and the beautiful ending they had created together.